After completing the story front to back twice, as well as completely 100%ing the game, including getting the Platinum Trophy, I can safely say that I've gotten my fill of Spider-Man 2. I would insert a 19 inches of Venom meme, but you bitches have driven that fucking joke into the ground. So after spending 45 hours with the game, my god, I can easily say that it's the best Insomniac Spider-Man game. It's so fucking good. And because of that, I had to give it some level of respect by making the biggest review I have ever made. Go hard or go home, I guess. If you want me to talk about the game in depth, spoilers and all, then click to the next section. However, for those of you who like hearing my opinions, I guess, and want a spoiler-free recommendation, then this is my opinion as succinctly as I can give it without spoiling the game whatsoever. All of the footage will be from the opening 3 or so hours, so don't worry whatsoever. I guess the simplest way to put it is that if you liked the first 2 games at all, then you'll probably love Spider-Man 2. Regardless of my negative opinions on the $70 price hike, this is a game I'd highly suggest buying close to launch since the story is the biggest selling point, at least for me as a Spider-Man fan. And boy does it go some places I didn't expect it to at all. Despite some opinions floating around out there, the campaign is pretty long, coming in at about 15 to 16 hours. And Insomniac managed to do a fantastic job of following both the first game as well as Miles Morales, on top of taking their, I guess, shared universe into a few new directions that I think we'll all be talking about for quite some time. The dev team stepped their game up in both the narrative as well as the gameplay, including the best swinging in any Spider-Man game ever, hands down. You can't argue with it, I'm sorry. The most suits in any Spider-Man game, insane levels of accessibility, as well as a revamped abilities and gadget system that's intuitive and is even somewhat customizable. Is it bullshit that it's not being released on PC at the same time as PS5? Yes. Other games can do it, Spider-Man should be the same way, console exclusivity be damned. But if you're someone who has access to a PS5 in any way, or you're someone looking for a reason to own the console, this is it. It's well worth the money. And so, with that all said and done, from here on out, spoilers. Alright, now that those fucking weirdos are out of here, Spider-Man 2's story is so fucking good. And I mean really, really good. And I can only really explain with a short recap. Bear with me. We have time, obviously. After the amazing opening of Peter and Miles stopping Flint Marko, the story kicks off with Kraven going to New York to hunt superhumans, while at the same time, Harry is now finally out of his tank following the ending of Miles Morales. Why did it take almost a year for him to show his face? Not too sure, but whatever. It's nice to see the trio reunited this way. After Harry reveals a research foundation meant to heal the world that's named in memory of both his mother as well as Peter's aunt, and offers Peter a job there, everything seems to be going really well. Which, as a Spider-Man fan, is a telltale sign that things will go very, very wrong. Kraven begins to hunt down and execute villains from the previous game one by one, trying to find one who will surpass his own strength. Now, RIP to the homies, I wish you guys could be in another game, you didn't deserve that, but it is what it is. Miles and Peter both save Black Cat and Tombstone respectively, and Harry lends a helping hand once he reveals that he has the power of the symbiote. However, after being turned into a kebab by Kraven, the symbiote lets go of Harry and latches on to Peter, reviving him. The only problem is that the symbiote is what was healing Harry's illness. So now Peter has to figure out how to get the symbiote off of him with the help of Dr. Connors, who's been forcefully turned back into the lizard by Kraven. And also, Peter doesn't sound right. Mind you, this is only the halfway point of the story. There's so much left to go on. From here, Peter becomes, for a lack of a better term, the fucking Antichrist, and after an amazing boss fight between him and Miles that everyone called on being in this game, he eventually removes the symbiote, which then latches onto Harry, leading to a surprise 11th hour Web of Shadows-like story where Venom's plan is to heal the world by turning everyone into symbiotes. I haven't even touched on the insane third act, MJ's struggles with dealing with Peter as well as her job now that Jonah's taken over the Bugle again, or Miles' own arc of seeking revenge on Mr. Negative as well as trying to find a perfect balance of the two sides of who he is. Going into Spider-Man 2, my biggest concern for the story was that Insomniac would just fall back to the formula that the first two games had, where there's a C-tier villain who has no ties to Spider-Man outside of just being evil, while another villain is revealed who has a bigger connection to whoever is under the mask. This also kind of did that, but it works because of how much Insomniac put into having everything feel like it really mattered. It can't be easy at all juggling two main characters, two main villains, and a absolute truckload of smaller characters on both sides, all of which have their own goals and histories with each other. Meanwhile, there's 80 years of lore tied to all of them that have given each different fan a specific perspective on what these characters should be. Any other game would probably fall under the pressure. Thankfully, Spider-Man 2 has simply great writing. As someone who outright isn't a fan of Kraven whatsoever, he is a ruthless fucking animal in this game who took control of the screen every single time he showed up. Just that scene with him and Mary Jane in Connor's cage made me do a complete 180. He might not be the most complex villain, but I still loved every second of him, and I wish that there was more. Harry and Peter's friendship feels very natural, which was kind of concerning since Harry was gone for both of the previous installments. But nothing felt rushed or forced, and his evolution into Venom was also really well done. Despite having little to no dialogue for his screen time, Venom had the physicality and voice down perfectly. Shouts out Tony Todd for just existing, because fuck did he deliver an amazing performance. Every single time Venom said Pete, I had the biggest shit-eating grin on my face. I'd also like to note that I'm glad that Harry doesn't fully turn against Peter. He has his feelings of inadequacy, as well as a lot of built-up animosity over his condition, and feeling as though Miles took his place. There's even that scene later in the game where he straight up attacks MJ and Peter, but most of that can be attributed to the symbiote, while Harry himself never fully turns evil, and I like that a lot. The game establishes that the symbiote is clearly the one in control of its hosts, so it's kind of understandable why Venom doesn't really have that much character depth or a deep vendetta against Peter. The symbiote wants to rule the world, Harry wants to heal it, both feel forgotten and thrown away by Peter, and all of that equals Venom, and I'm fine with the way he's adapted this time around. And by keeping Harry, MJ, and Peter's friendship intact by the end of the game, it sets a more interesting stage for the third installment, rather than him and his dad just straight up hating Peter, which would feel kind of forced. Miles' arc is all about coming to terms with how hard it is to balance everything as he applies to college, while also learning to let go of the past as he simultaneously begins his own relationship with Hailey, who I'm glad to see return from his standalone game. I was kind of scared that the game would treat him as second fiddle, but instead he's just as capable as Peter. I guess due to the more recent movie interpretations of all these characters, I've kind of gotten tired of characters constantly needing to learn that they deserve to be Spider-Man. So I appreciate that the game recognizes that this is Miles' second major outing as Spider-Man and treats it as such. He's not learning to take the mantle, he's just getting to the point where Peter was at the same age, and it's nice to see. I appreciate that the game calls out Peter's behavior that's done with and without the symbiote, while resolving the issue without completely destroying Peter's life and sending him back to ground zero. Listen, I may not have been there for one more day when it happened, but as someone who's picked up a Spider-Man comic before, the reset is something that's all too common for the character. So I'm very glad that Peter is able to maintain his relationships solely by putting in the hard work and talking about it. A lot of my favorite scenes in this game is just people talking. Many of these scenes are just character studies on who both of the Spider-Men really are. The scenes of Miles' self-doubt escalating to the point where he imagines his dead father disowning him was depressing. But seeing him eventually accept that this is just his skewed perception was on the same level as any other triumphant scene for the character. The flashback of younger Peter losing his anger over the way that the media perceives the wall crawler is a very meaningful moment that's important for the story that Insomniac's trying to tell. Because you rarely see Peter snap like that, at least in this iteration of the character. In almost every other incarnation of Peter, his short temper and negative self-talk is an important part of who he is. And that part of him being paramount to the symbiote storyline has always been one of the reasons I've liked adaptations of it. Almost immediately after finishing that take, half of the fire alarms in my apartment just started going off. I changed the battery, couldn't get them to go off. I had to call the maintenance guy. He came in the morning, the ass crack of dawn. I was still in my room sleep. I put in the notice for him to knock, but he didn't knock. What the fuck, man? So yeah, that's been the past 2 days of my life. What about you? Seeing May decide to console Peter instead of making him feel as if his emotions were invalid is just such good fucking character development. It's fascinating to me how a character who's existed as long as Peter, but was solely created to be the doting mother stereotype, is still getting interesting scenes 80 years later. I also love the not so subtle hint towards May just knowing Peter is Spider-Man, and it just goes over his head. Alright, I have to talk about the ending before my brain fucking explodes. When Peter decides to finally take a break at the end of the story, it isn't done out of malice for that character or to write Peter out of the next game, but a natural evolution of where these two Spider-Men are in their lives. Peter isn't retiring, he's just stepping back for a while. The scene makes that very clear. After 2 games worth of saving the city, on top of not really having a stable job since the opening of the first game, as well as his and Mary Jane's relationship getting more serious, it's time for him to slow down and work on himself. All the while, Miles slowly begins to work his way to where Peter was in the first game. He's going to college, he has strong relationships with his trio of friends, and who knows, he'll probably begin to have his own villains. He's not replacing Peter. At this point in time, they're just growing into different people, and it's so well done. If you can't tell, I really like this story. Like any other modern Spider-Man story, it borrows a ton from past versions of the character. Kraven's entire motivation is just a variation of Kraven's Last Hunt. Venom borrows a lot from King in Black. Harry is just a carbon copy of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The final act, as the city becomes a symbiote wasteland, is just Web of Shadows. From the open world being covered in symbiote nests, to characters close to Spider-Man being turned into symbiotes, namely Mary Jane, to even Moonlight Sonata playing during a late game side mission. Not to mention that there's kind of a lot of character beats and boss fights borrowed from Spider-Man 3 from both the movie and the game? I mean, the lizard fight is just lifted from that game. These weren't the references I was expecting whatsoever, but I'll tell you what, when I played this for the first time, I was having a fucking ball. All of these sources vary in how they're used. As I said, some are just straight up lifted from their source material, while something like Kraven's Last Hunt, which is originally a slow, dark story that has kind of a lot going on, but basically, Kraven buries Spider-Man alive, takes his place, and then eventually succumbs to his mental illness. Here, it's entirely stripped of its teeth. Now, Kraven's reasoning for a final hunt to die to is a terminal cancer diagnosis, and his death is instead at the hands of Venom, or more accurately, the teeth. That scene was so fucking cool. The Web of Shadow inspirations were, again, a delightful surprise, especially since my issues with that game's story was the repetition and lack of good world building to make me care once the symbiotes take over. So seeing almost the same story just told in a better universe with lots of world building and interesting characters was perfect. Chef's kiss. But then there's Venom, who adopts all the iconography of the Donny Cates Ryan Stegman run without much of the story behind it. And as expected, since nobody hates Spider-Man more than Spider-Man fans, there's been a lot of backlash towards this sort of approach of chopping and screwing Spider-Man lore. As somebody who also has a hyperfixation on Spider-Man, I can understand people being upset by the game borrowing the iconography without fully adapting the respective characters or their storylines. Mainly Harry becoming Agent Venom, MJ becoming Scream, and Peter becoming Anti-Venom, all with little to no explanation or really accuracy to their original stories. I should note that I wasn't really bothered by these, I actually kind of liked it a lot. But even I have some reservations on how the Last Hunt portion of the story was executed. But to me, if Insomniac never had the intention of adapting King in Black, Planet of the Symbiotes, Last Hunt, or even introducing characters like Flash Thompson so he can turn into Agent Venom, then there's no real issue with borrowing visuals and beats from these different stories to integrate them and do something new. Although, what I will say is that the lack of credit or even a special thanks to certain creators is a bit ridiculous. Specifically Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman, especially when the original creators of Venom, Todd McFarlane and David Michelini, were given credit. Of course, I'm not saying that the original creators shouldn't be credited, however, without these influential stories, Spider-Man and his gigantic cast of characters wouldn't be in the position they are to even adapt them in the first place. Not to mention that credit is something that both the comic book and video game industry struggle with. Regardless, credit should be given to them, there's no excuse. Remember when this is a review about Spider-Man 2? I think what's so good about 2's story is that it's the first time in a long while that a Spider-Man story has surprised me or kept me guessing. The first game was somewhat focused on polish. It did some bold stuff, it used a lesser known villain in all of the marketing, killed off Aunt May, and even told a variation of Miles Morales' origin story without having to kill off Peter. But it was ultimately a story we've all kind of seen before, just as cleanly told as it could be. Miles Morales was more of the same formula, only with that signature Miles twist, with the focus on the residents of Harlem, and remnants of a socio-political message that's almost sort of swept under the rug. While 2 looks at the 60 plus years worth of stories and uses them almost like Legos, mixing and matching them in a way that fits the narrative it's trying to tell. Even with the game leaving off on the cliffhanger that Norman's hunting down both Peter and Miles, Otto's preparing to return, Cindy Moon is being thrown into the picture, as well as all of the side missions that I'll talk about soon enough, I still have no real clue as to where the story will go next. And I'm glad to see it. Between this and Across the Spider-Verse, the character of Spider-Man is in a new era of innovation and creativity in terms of storytelling. A good story should be able to keep your attention and make you invested in its world beyond all practical thought. When Peter was stabbed, I was so wrapped up in the moment that I was invested in it. Despite subconsciously knowing that Insomniac wouldn't kill him off, it wouldn't make any sense. But the fact that I'm questioning whether or not that would happen, the fact that I even care, is the sign of a well-told narrative. I saw a decent amount of criticism pointed towards MJ's character this time around, that they stripped her of her agency and just gave her a gun. And I cannot tell you how much I vehemently disagree. Actually, I can, that's just a figure of speech, it's kind of my job to tell you my opinions. Both her and Peter's arcs of not needing to prove themselves and learning to trust each other respectively are over. She just goes behind enemy lines in each of these games now, it's just how things work in their relationship. Mary Jane's struggles this time around of having to deal with Jonah, as well as feeling like she has to play second fiddle to Peter in their relationship, is a believable conflict. And having the two of them work it out in a symbiote fight may be a little corny to some, but we're playing as a man who's dressed head to toe in skin-tight spandex. I get that the turn your brain off argument is really reductive and doesn't help anybody, and that's not what I'm trying to say here. But what the fuck do you want? Do you want Marriage Story with Peter and Mary Jane? I'm kidding, I actually kind of want that. Beyond their relationship struggles, MJ plays a major role in the climax and is on equal footing with the two Spider-Men. She literally has an entire mission where she fights symbiotes all on her own. Whittling all of that character work and build up, and her and Peter working through their relationship troubles to, damn, they gave her a gun, is a little bit ridiculous. Norman Osborn is still a really good character. I appreciate how much they doubled down on how much he loves Harry in this game. He gets some good shining moments in here, like him confiding in Peter, which is just a straight adaptation of the same scene in the first Raimi film, down to Norman saying that Peter's like a son to him. Norman's love for Harry is one that leads him to make some terrible decisions again and again, to the point where he's almost neglectful. It's kind of a shame that Norman doesn't have much to do here in the story beyond slowly losing his grip on his sanity as Harry's condition gets worse. I get that he's mostly developing the G serum, but that's all kind of off screen, and I almost wish that there were more scenes between him and Harry. There's not too many in the game. That's probably the point of his character, and that'll probably be more important in the third game, just something I noticed. During the first appearance of Venom, Norman is more focused on containing the situation and not having any consequences for him and Harry, rather than the people his son is killing. Making Norman the cause behind both games' overall plot is pretty genius, and I'm very sure that that'll play into the third game. Martin Lee's inclusion initially seemed like just a means to an end to further Miles' character arc of no longer seeking revenge, but over time he became an interesting character in his own right outside of just being a fucking terrorist. Lee was a great addition that helps pose a question that the entire game ponders. Does Peter cause more harm by not killing, or more plainly, do people deserve second chances? Obviously that plays into the running theme of forgiving and letting go, and from my perspective, the answer is obviously yes. As complicated and messy as the world of Spider-Man is, it's still fictional. Regardless of how much is lost or how much damage is done, the bad guys will always lose, the good guys will always win. But it's still fascinating to see characters have different perspectives, like Miles stating boldly that people always deserve second chances, only for him and Lee to see what Peter's gone through during his career as Spider-Man by fighting a never-ending horde of demons that keep escaping their cells. Something that's only stopped by the appearance of the symbiote. This fucking story is so damn good. So yeah, I loved Lee. I'm not sure if he's gonna return in the third game. I almost don't think that he should. He's good now, I don't think he has his powers anymore, and he's served his purpose to the overall story. I will say that Black Cat's return was interesting. On his way to save her from Kraven, Miles catches Felicia breaking into the Sanctum Sanctorum to steal an artifact, allowing her to make portals in order to go to Paris to see her girlfriend. So yes, Felicia is confirmed to be bisexual, which I'm pretty sure was already a thing, but it's still gonna upset somebody for some reason. Although I say it's interesting because they do have some small gripes with it. Like, I'm not a big fan of Miles saving her instead of Peter. I did appreciate Miles and Felicia's banter, and I like the lesson of him learning to do what he thinks is best instead of just listening to MJ or Peter. But I'm not a big fan that Felicia just kind of talks to Peter over the phone well after she escapes for like 5 seconds. This is probably worsened by the fact that I just replayed The City That Never Sleeps a few weeks ago, and it just seemed like Insomniac was setting up her character to do anything, only for her to have a very brief appearance. As much as I like that she gets a happy ending, I kinda think that maybe she should have been killed by Kraven instead of Scorpion. Only because it would have allowed Peter to have some sort of personal vendetta against Kraven. As is, he's just kinda mad at him on the behalf of other villains like Flip Marko and Kurt Connors. Now, I don't know, I'm just spitballing off the top of my head. The mission is probably thematically sound as is, since her allowing to escape and be with her girlfriend is her second chance, which plays into the big running theme of the story. Now, I've already explained what happens in the final moments of the story as well as the after credit scenes. I just wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't touch on Norman and Otto. The scene between Norman and Otto is the epitome of the term petty. The first thing Otto does when he hears that Harry is in a vegetative state is almost piss himself in happiness. I just adore the hatred that these men have for each other, and I cannot wait to see them have the biggest beef on planet Earth in the third game. Insomniac, Brian Intihar, hear me now. If I'm not able to play as Doc Ock beating the piss out of Green Goblin in Spider-Man 3, I'm torching my fucking PlayStation 5. The Cindy Moon reveal was a really big surprise, since I'm not too familiar with Silk outside of her appearance in Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man run, and that wasn't the best introduction to her character, to say the least. But I'd really like to see Insomniac's interpretation of her, especially since she's only existed for 9 years, and despite Sony's best efforts, I guess as you want to call it, she hasn't been adapted into a movie or a TV show yet. So I can't wait to see what Insomniac would do with her character, and see if that eventually has some sort of knock-on effect on other interpretations of the character. Maybe she'd be Miles' prodigy? 2 spider people living under the same roof would be a lot of fun. I liked how the game juggled the 2 Spider-Men this time around, and it'd be nice to have the ability to choose which of the 3 you want to use, or maybe Insomniac would continue with the 2 playable characters thing, and have Peter as a sort of guest character like Venom was in this game. This is obviously all fan speculation, but it just goes to show how much I fucking eat up these Spider-Man games, man. Great googly moogly, that's it. That's all the story stuff that I got in me, man. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it! Thankfully, the same evolution and growth that was given to the story is shown in the gameplay as well. In some ways, I'm glad Insomniac stuck to their guns and evolved on some contentious parts of the previous games, or reintegrated them with a different angle. And hot diggity damn does this game do some great stuff. Of course, not everything is perfect. As a matter of fact, I have more critiques here than I did with the story, but we'll get there in due time. Spider-Man 2 has to be the most accessible game I've seen in recent memory, dethroning the also amazing Guardians of the Galaxy. The options this time are almost overwhelming. The biggest addition that not enough people are really talking about is that the difficulty can be completely customized down to the enemy health and damage dealt. This is kind of a big deal, since the other games uses the one-size-fits-all routine, and the Platinum even required you playing on the hardest difficulty, which was doable. They weren't extremely hard games, but it was a little annoying. Personally, as somebody who replays games a lot, the ability to disable tutorials altogether makes the second playthrough a lot less annoying than most games would be. The game no longer slows down to a crawl and gives you instructions one by one during certain sections. The first Mary Jane mission specifically was riddled with these slow instructions, ruining the entire thing. However, the most notable option in the accessibility menu is the swing assistance, altering how much the game holds your hand, with 10 being the same level as 1 in Miles Morales, and 0 being entirely physics-based. Between this and other additions and slight alterations, I really do think that Insomniac has undeniably made the best web swinging system. By melding the fluidity and beautifully animated system of the first two games with the speed and freedom of previous titles by lowering the swinging assistance on top of the new web wings, this is the most fun I've had swinging in New York. I initially thought I wouldn't use the web wings that much, but they eventually became a crutch for me in this game. I've replayed 1 in Miles Morales and I still love those game systems, but the speeds you can reach in 2 are insane. I mean, just pulling off the loop-de-loop trick was so satisfying every time. The web wings add so much versatility in what you can do. Sometimes I'd pull off moves like gliding through the structure of a bridge, or zip around a corner. It would make me feel, I'm gonna say the thing, it made me feel like the Spooderman. I found myself so wound up with going through wind tunnels or slingshotting myself off a building that I'd completely forget that you can web zip around corners or trebuchet yourself off of roofs. Stuff I'd done all the time in the previous two. I barely ever wall ran in my entire first playthrough at all. I'd imagine at level 0 assistance you'd be forced to use everything at your disposal to not look like you suck at the game, but personally I stuck between 3 and 5 since it was a perfect balance of skill and dumb fun. I do wish that there was an option to disable the game automatically letting go of your web once you reach the height of your swing. Like, even on level 1 the game will automatically detach the web, which is a bit frustrating. The inclusion of fall damage is funny. I don't think anyone needed it, and I'm glad that it's optional. For the Raimi games who really wanted this to be closer to those games, I guess I'm happy it's here, but outside of a few laughs amongst friends, it doesn't really add any difficulty and can actively be annoying when you just try to land to complete a mission. Alright, suit time. The suits are fucking amazing. There was a lot of fluff cut from the previous two. Some omissions felt odd, specifically the comic and animated suits, since there's a classic black suit that has an animated color tone, so that doesn't make any sense. Peter B. Parker is completely removed, which again doesn't make sense with all the Spider-Verse suits available in this game, and I personally really miss the Peter in his underwear suit. But that doesn't mean that what we got this time was disappointing. On the contrary, the big change this time is that majority of the suits that aren't based on the movies have alternate color palettes. And I want you to know that I really like this change. It's just that most of these color palettes aren't that good. There's a few that really hit the nail on the head. Most of Miles are really well done, while only a few work for Peter, like the pink Secret Wars suit I really liked, the classic suit Webman, and the Ditko red and black classic suit was a really nice touch. The classic black suit can turn into the purplish ultimate version, and that made the Ultimate Spider-Man fan in me squeal, but the rest of these kind of feel like they're throwing everything at the wall. That doesn't mean that I'm not glad it's here. When it comes to cosmetics, the more options the better, and I'm sure that there's a lot of other people who get a kick out of these alternate color schemes, and honestly, more power to them. I'm usually not as judgmental towards Insomniac suit designs. Peter's new suit is perfect. It fixes majority of what I didn't like about the first game's advanced suit. That is, save for the gauntlets. I wasn't a fan of those are kind of bulky. His anti-venom suit is pretty great, save for the lenses. The bridges around them are a little bit too big. However, Miles' new suit towards the end of the game is pretty ugly, and I'm not a big fan of bandwagoning, but I really don't like his suit. I'm also not a fan of the ones that you get from the later side missions either. When it was shown in the gameplay trailer that we'd have both the red and blue as well as the black Raimi suit, I damn near I couldn't wait to do a New Game Plus run with only playing with the Raimi suits. The only issue is that New Game Plus isn't added yet, and as of now, you're completely unable to alter the black suit. Once Peter gets the symbiote on, you're unable to change the suit whatsoever while in main missions, which feels like a waste. Some of the alternate suits are marked as black suit, like 2099, and other black suits emit black webs, like the classic black suit or the black Raimi suit. So maybe once New Game Plus is added, you'll be able to change that. It's not really sure right now. It'd be nice if once the patch comes out, you're able to pick a regular suit and a black suit, but it sucks that we'll have to wait for that to be added. Combat has been altered a decent amount this time around. The first thing you notice in the opening mission is that there's a larger emphasis on brute strength and your ability to dodge as well as parry. I still wouldn't call it an Arkham clone, but it does notably play differently than the first. You can parry enemies now. I'm not too sure why. There's nothing wrong with it inherently, it just kind of feels weird that Spider-Man is out here parrying like it's a fucking Soulsborne game, but it does add an extra tool to your arsenal, and is required to defeat some enemies in the game. Miles' special attacks are mostly borrowed from his standalone game, but he does obtain entirely new ones as you complete story missions. Peter, on the other hand, has 3 different kinds of abilities you can mix and match. One's for the Iron Spider arms, as well as the symbiote and anti-venom tendrils respectively. He also gets a devil trigger of sorts where his strength is maxed out, allowing him to finish enemies in like 2 hits. It's so rewarding to fill that meter and just press L3 and R3 and just whoop symbiote ass. The symbiote and anti-venom powers feel so much better and do so much more damage than the Iron Spider arms that they're almost useless about 5 or so hours in. All in all, it kind of sounds like you're overpowered, but 2 is actually quite difficult. First off, you get all these different abilities piecemeal over the course of the story, which is about 15 or so hours, and the gadget wheel has been completely scrapped. I didn't outright hate it, but it did get a little old having to stop combat entirely just to change my webs. In its place, you hold R1 and press the corresponding button to use gadgets, and L1 to use abilities, like in Miles Morales. It's fine. The only thing I'm kind of not fully on board with is the new gadgets. I kinda hate them, they feel very underpowered. Brian Intihar noted that the team removed a lot of the gadgets so that they didn't feel like the win button. He also said that the team opted for gadgets that would allow more options in combat without being overpowered. There's only 4 of them, 5 technically if you count the web shooters, one of them being the fucking suspension matrix, the gadget I've used the least in the first 2 games. Another is a altered version of the concussion blast, which is useful later in the game when it's altered to affect symbiotes, but the omission of impact webs or trip mines feels a little odd. I do really like the web grabber. I like that it just kind of grabs every single usable item around the room and just hits the enemy with it. Almost always made me laugh, and I also like the ricochet web. I understand that limiting the gadgets is meant to balance out the overpowered abilities, but they still felt less useful this time. For the majority of the game, you'll be fighting the same 4 or so hunters, and it began to drain on me very quickly. Eventually, you'll begin running into the Blaze Cult in the open world, which you won't understand who they are or what they're after until you complete that side mission. Occasionally, you'll run into regular thugs during the opening, and in the last 3 or so hours, you'll mainly be fighting symbiotes. The symbiotes were the only group I constantly enjoyed fighting. They managed to constantly offer a challenging fight with how many there are and how hard they hit, while also having an exploitable weakness with the concussion blast. Not to mention that their designs being references to other symbiotes in Venom's history was a nice little detail that I appreciated. However, the hunters were so fucking monotonous to fight that when replaying the game, I had to play it in 2 to 3 hour sessions just so I didn't get bored. They're just as bad as the Sable Guards from the first game. I just wish that they as a faction had more variety and were a little less annoying. Also, you can't heal anymore unless you have a full finisher bar, which feels like a bit of a needless change. Deciding over whether you should play it safe and heal faster, or be patient and use that bar for finishers, was a fun gamble to play around with in the first game. Even in Miles Morales, you still use it for both health and electric powers. And so to change it to where you can only heal if you have a full bar, it feels really needless to me. Of course, my complaints doesn't negate how much work has gone into this combat system. Even stealth has been updated with the addition of the new webline system. While the removal of trip mines and such is definitely still felt here, arguably more so than the regular hand-to-hand combat, the ability to make your own tightrope does add an almost unfair advantage in stealth, so I can totally understand why those gadgets would be removed. While lots of the omissions and changes don't land for everybody, and some of the enemies needed some more variety, I do appreciate the polish that was put into the combat to make it stand apart from its predecessors. And I will say that once you have all of your abilities unlocked, you definitely feel like a powerhouse. I already knew that it's just the same map arguments were fucking stupid before the game came out, and now having played it, they're really just fucking brain dead. One of the biggest selling points for this game was the city being double the size of the last one, which was one of the biggest things I've missed since the PS2 games, was being able to cross the river and see the different sides of New York, and I'm so glad that it's back. And yeah, it's kind of the same map, but What the fuck do you want, Spider-Man in Belgium? Credit where credit's due, the map is as different as it can be while still being New York. Visually, it's a lot more colorful this time around. The trees are more pronounced, the skyscrapers feel a lot more varied, there's even tons of murals and unique landmarks that make this iteration of the city feel much more dynamic than ever before. Fast travel has changed, which I didn't expect at all. Notably, you unlock it by completing side content instead of just doing the cell towers, which I'm very happy is gone. But also, Spider-Man no longer rides the subway to set locations. Now he fast travels to the exact point on the map that you point him towards, and it's single-handedly one of the best uses of the SSD, and should honestly be the standard way fast travel is done from here on out. Apparently, people are upset that the little scenes have been removed, which is understandable, those are pretty nice to see. But they're also mad that Spider-Man can't go into the subway anymore. There needs to be a state-mandated media literacy course, because this is getting fucking ridiculous. Look, SSDs and technology aside, it's okay for a sequel to be distinct from its predecessor. Alterations and changes allow each different installment to have their own identity. Despite what some people have said, Spider-Man 2 isn't supposed to replace the first game or Miles Morales. It's okay that it does some things differently, and it's understandable to prefer the old way, but that doesn't make the new method automatically shit. Also, I don't know who needs to tell you this, but every open world game doesn't need to have extremely detailed or well done interiors. That's extra, that's the chips with the sandwich. It's nice if it's there, but it's not really needed. This narrative that every game should be Saints Row 2 or Cyberpunk or some shit, and have randomly well done interior buildings to explore that offer nothing in terms of gameplay, or have an immense amount of detail that most people won't see, is ridiculous. Not to imply that game development was ever easy, because it wasn't, but it's also not 2009 anymore. Everything is higher def, games are bigger, and all that requires more hours of work to develop. And I just don't understand looking at this game, this gigantic work of art, and getting mad that the digital people in their house aren't detailed enough. What the fuck are you? I just realized that I'm getting bothered by nitpicks over a Spider-Man game. I appreciate all the little secrets that were added into the game, like the unmarked bike that you can ride in Astoria that will randomly despawn once you get too far. I personally think that it was probably for dev purposes to test the bike mechanic for the main missions. There's been a few findings of things left behind in the game, and I think that this bike is the same, since it, as I mentioned, randomly disappears, plus there's no real button prompt, it just says triangle to drive. So I wouldn't be surprised if this either gets fixed or even removed. There's also a lot more Easter eggs for eagle-eyed Marvel fans this time around. There's a lot of other secrets, like you could find Dima, Kraven's tiger, brought to the zoo later in the game, obviously after Kraven gets half eaten. I will say that it's pretty barren once the game is 100% completed, but like this is the case for every Spider-Man game, so this is no exception. And in a way, I guess being left wanting more is always a good thing. The random crimes are mostly just copied from past games, which is to be expected. Most of these have been included in some way in every Spider-Man game since 2004. And what ain't broke, don't fix it. Except Insomniac had some interesting changes here for a longtime fan. Mainly, crimes no longer count towards 100% completion, which automatically makes them way more fun. They shouldn't feel like a chore, and just by removing that, it makes them way more fun to do. I love to see the return of some forgotten side activities like taking civilians to the hospital. I don't think that one's been in a game since The Amazing Spider-Man in 2012, unless the second game had some, but we don't really talk about the second game. The car chase has been whittled down to just one button press, and then the entire takedown is just a cutscene that you watch. You don't understand the joy that surged through my veins as a Spider-Man fan. The car chase has not fundamentally changed since Spider-Man 2. You'd always have to land on the car, dodge the bullets, beat up the car, or web the criminals in the car until it stops. It's one of the most tedious side activities it's ever been in any Spider-Man game, and unfortunately it's been in every Spider-Man game. So now being able to just land, press square or circle and move on is the streamlining that I really needed to see. There's some new ones, specifically with the Blaze cult, like the tanker you have to prevent from exploding or the apartment building on fire. but most of those are just combat once you web up the fires. I do like that opposing factions will fight each other and even ambush you as you're in the middle of stopping a crime. I like the dynamicness of it. It adds a random factor that previous games' crimes have kind of lacked. There's some interesting storytelling and even world building done in these random crimes. Running into the other Spider-Man is pretty common, and it was cute to do the team takedowns, or do the pointing meme, and even this awkward hug thing. But on my second playthrough, I found out that you can run into both Harry during his Agent Venom era and Yuri as Wraith, even after her side missions are over. Or once you obtain the black suit, Miles won't banter with you or high-five you anymore until you remove it. There's lots of these little details and additions that many people are going to miss on their first playthrough, and that's a shame, as just being able to run into other characters makes New York feel more like a city than a digital playground. I also really enjoyed Miles calling Yuri ma'am and her just not having any of that. Are we done yet? No, I haven't even talked about the main missions. There's still side missions to get to. What the fuck? The main missions this time around have a lot more experimentation than I expected from a Spider-Man game. Obviously, you'll be spending most of your time in combat and stealth with the occasional set piece. But with the larger scope, Spider-Man 2 was consistently interesting, regardless of the task at hand. Although I do have to say that if you hate the sort of cinematic gameplay where you're mostly just walking and mechanics are sort of drip fed to you one by one, you're not gonna like Spider-Man 2. At least not as much as other people. These missions were easy to ignore or to rush through in the first game, but in Spider-Man 2, a lot of these slower sections are intertwined with the story in a way that deliberately forces the entire game's pace to slow down. And while I liked some of it, the high school flashback mission was really good, there's some missions that I immediately realized would be fun on the first playthrough, but would quickly get old and actively dampen the experience. So not all of them work as well, but I appreciate that the pacing here is a lot more deliberate, and will oftentimes slow down entirely for character moments, like the entire Coney Island mission, which can be extended by playing extra rides and games. All of the minigames were a neat inclusion, although the motion controls don't really work that well. Basically, if the story of Spider-Man 2 doesn't matter to you, then you probably won't have a great time. The boss fights have gone a complete step up in both difficulty and scale, to the point where the first two games aren't even in the same league. Almost all of them have multiple stages this time around, which I wasn't expecting whatsoever. Most of them, like Lizard, Mr. Negative, Kraven, Scream, and Venom, all have 4 health bars, while some side characters' health bars vary. While some of the bosses may lack in terms of complexity, that doesn't mean that they're easy. These fuckers are fast, deal a lot of damage, and usually have some sort of additional mechanic like knocking down the lizard by opening these vents, webbing up the bell while fighting Kraven, or jumping to a different platform in the final fight with Venom. Some were pretty difficult, mainly both the fight with Kraven and Venom, which both gave me a bit of trouble on normal, while the rest are pretty easy and can sometimes go on for a little too long. Specifically, the Scream fight went on for a little bit. The opening Sandman fight alone was such a great tone setter for the entire game. I've played 2018 so many times that I didn't think that I could get hyped like that in an opening, and I was dead fucking wrong. Immediately crossing the river, or watching this cutscene of Miles just slingshotting himself halfway across the city, on top of fighting Kaiju Sandman from the end of Spider-Man 3 was so fucking great. And obviously I can't ignore just how good the Miles and Peter fight was, and I'm so happy that it's fucking here. It was pretty genius to have the bell work as something you had to defend yourself from when playing as Peter, then as a tool to stop him when you play as Miles. Just chef's fucking kiss. Now obviously there's another moment that was included solely due to fan outcry, and that was playable Venom. He might only be playable for one mission, but it's so much fun. I love that the game tricks you into thinking you're going to fight Venom as Peter, only for it to pull a 180 and have you escape Oscorp as him. I will forever and ever be grateful to Ultimate Spider-Man because it allowed us to get this. He's so powerful while not feeling too bulky or obtuse. I love that his finishers are needlessly brutal, and you can even grab and throw security guards. On my second playthrough, I was able to use everything to achieve an almost flow state where I was just constantly destroying everything around me. The ensuing boss fight with Kraven was fun, although it did feel a bit tedious since most of his attacks were just the same from when you fought him as Peter, and I'm not sure that he needed multiple health bars. I loved the new Black Cat chase. That is just a staple in these games that's always fun. and the addition of her teleporting to different parts of the city was a great addition that makes this stand out. And I do wish that it took advantage of that a bit more, and had Miles go to more random places than just that quick section in Antarctica, plus the mission lasts no longer than like 10-12 minutes, but it's still very fun. After years of crying and complaining and criticizing them, the MJ missions have returned, and honestly, there was so much added to them to the point that I was actually excited when they showed up in this game. I honestly never thought I'd see the day, but I'm so happy with how these turned out. She can now use both the lure as well as a modified stun gun with a web shooter, so there's a lot more going on here mechanically than just the linear hallways of the first game. The second best one is the final mission at the very end of the game, where she enters the symbiote nest to steal the meteorite, and it just turns into a survival horror game. Combat is no longer optional, there's no stealth here whatsoever, and your ammo is very limited. Again, was not expecting a Resident Evil clone at all, but hey, it was damn fun. Of course, the best one is when the hunters ambush her and Peter at May's house, because we get to see a classic moment through Mary Jane's eyes, and that's Peter's body being taken over by the symbiote while he's sleeping and having no clue as to what he's doing. That mission just kept escalating and escalating until the big moment of MJ trying to wake up Peter, only for the symbiote to chase her and kill her if you're caught. It's exactly what I wanted from a scene like this, and it was executed just so well. This is what happens when a dev studio doesn't listen to whiny internet dwellers and instead decides to stick to their guns. With that being said, why the fuck did the Peter DNA puzzles return? For some people, this is going to tingle a part of their brain as a nice way to amuse themselves, but for me, it was a way to tingle my thumb to skip this shit. I appreciate that both varieties are less obnoxious than they have been in the past, but I still skipped all of them and felt no remorse whatsoever. I really like when Insomniac is able to tell their stories through gameplay like the lizard chase. When comparing the helicopter sequence in the first game to the lizard chase this time around, it goes to show just how reckless Peter is when he has the symbiote. He doesn't web any falling debris in the city, he doesn't save anyone, he just follows Connors, and terribly at that. Just little things like that I really appreciate. I also appreciate that there's less main missions that solely introduce side activities outside of the opening hour or so, which was my biggest issue with Insomniac's campaigns. Even the first game's DLC, half of its missions were just used as excuses to introduce open world content. Here, that's much less of a problem, and while there's still a few missions I didn't like, there's not as many I can think of as useless or superfluous. Speaking of side missions, let's go to the biggest part of this fucking video. Yay! When I first began to write the notes for this video and quickly realized, oh shit, this is gonna be a big one, I initially asked myself, why don't I do this more often? You know, why don't I make hour-long dissertations on games that I love from beginning to end? And the reason is that at the current juncture I am in my life, I don't have the fucking attention span to do that at all. It's been 5 days since I've last recorded this. It's going on 3 weeks that this game has been released, and I have nothing to show for it. Oh my god. Anyways, on the surface, Spider-Man 2 might seem like it has less stuff to do than in the first two games, especially since there's a lot of stuff that's been removed. There's no backpacks, no cell towers, and there's even less photo ops in the game. But the world is more dense in terms of what it offers. The most notable change is that the side missions have elevated to the point where they're more like main missions that were just splintered off into their own thing. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people are just going to skip them, but we'll get to those in due time. Before that, there's a lot of side stuff we have to cover very quickly. Marco's Memories is the first side quest that comes available to you after the opening mission. Pretty much after Sandman's attack on New York, he left behind crystals stuck inside of sandstorms. It's basically just more combat with sand minions, the only difference is that you break a crystal at the very end of it, which rewards you with an audio log that peers into Marco's mind after his mental break. The more crystals you collect, the more you're able to piece together what happened before the game started, and in turn, the more grip Marco gets from reality. I like this a lot as a side story. The slow reveal that Kraven was hunting Marco and his daughter, which led to his mental break, was really satisfying, and I appreciate the ending where all the crystals come together to make the statue of Marco and his daughter, who's now staying with her mother since Marco's, in jail. It's a sweet story, I'm not a big fan that it was added to a collectible side quest. The only Sandman story I really know outside of Spider-Man 3 is Spectacular Spider-Man 308, which is just... But as a Spider-Man 3 apologist, I will always love seeing Flint as a dad just trying to make ends meet in a world that looks down on those with a record, which again plays into the whole second chance thing. Enemy bases and outposts return by combining them into hunter blinds. I appreciate that there's a bit more depth added to them, since you have to complete the outposts in each area to locate the base. Each and every base is varied in how they look and operate, which I really appreciate. And there's also kind of a side story of learning about Kraven's family, mainly his daughter, who ends up murdering all of the other family members. There's something there that I want to talk about, but I think I'll make a separate video on that. You'll see. The wingsuit drone chases are more fun than I thought that they'd be. They were kind of my favorite pointless side quest in the game. I just really liked how fun they were. It kind of, oh my god, I just got an image of the fucking B-movie game, good lord. The whole premise is that you're trying to find out why all these dead people's DNA are tied to these drones, which is eventually revealed to be, surprise, the Chameleon. Nobody's fucking surprised at all. I'd almost be bothered if the Chameleon didn't show up in some capacity, considering that he and Kraven are brothers. The reveal itself also feels very similar to the ending of the Black Cat side quest in the very first game. It's this long, moody walk throughout Dimitri's apartment as he drones on and on about what he's planning, which leads me to believe that both Chameleon and Kraven's murderous daughter will be the focus of the DLC, which I will again talk about in a separate video. Symbiote Nest, something that's kind of borrowed from Web of Shadows. It's basically just a horde mode where you protect the bomb. Very unremarkable. The EMF has little research stations that you can work on, very similarly to the first game with the Oscorp stations. These ones are a lot less varied and elaborate. Some of them were really fun, specifically the one with the bike. I liked that mission a lot, but I personally wasn't too keen on the bee stuff. I get that both of these games are covering different environmental problems that we're facing in everyday society. I just kind of wish you could do the bee stuff in a more interesting way. The Spider-Bot side quest is just a series of collectibles you have to locate around the city, which is made all the more annoying since they aren't on the map. And it ends with an Across the Spider-Verse tie-in that's just kind of abrupt and unexpected. More so since the character you meet, Delilah, was cut from the final film, a common issue with Spider-Man movies. It's neat, I guess. The Spider-Bots have nice designs even though they serve no real function whatsoever. And it is kind of cool for this game to acknowledge the Spider-Verse since Insomniac Spider-Man has been in so many different crossovers, but it's definitely one of the weaker side quests in the game. The trophy for the worst of the worst goes to the Prowler stashes. They're fine puzzles that don't really overstay their welcome, but that's really it. They mainly focus on Spider-Man's detective mode, which is really only used in the occasional main mission. You locate whatever needs to be interacted with, you find the safe, mission over. None of them last more than 2 minutes, but they really felt useless. I really like the final scene, where Aaron gets to be in both Rio and Miles' life again after Jefferson's death. But that's all this has gotten going for it. None of these puzzles were fun or really difficult, and it's just kind of obnoxious to swing around the city to go find them. The photo ops return. Instead of photographing landmarks this time, you end up taking pictures that showcase New York. So you'll photograph Spider-Cat mascots voiced by Nathan Fillion and Alan Tudyk of all people, or a local market that carries some significance to the community. I like this activity a lot. This game has a lot of reverence for New York as a city, which you haven't really seen in past Spider-Man games. Plus, I've always had a soft spot on my cranium for taking pictures, and I appreciated Robbie's commentary on each location. Plus, there aren't very many, which is always a godsend. And with that, those are all the side missions and collectibles that you complete in the city. But there's still the character-specific side missions, as well as the app requests. The Brooklyn Vision missions have garnered a lot of criticism. Most of it is not valid, in my opinion. Personally, I liked them a lot. They had a nice high school energy that's never really been in any of these games. You pretty much just play as Miles, helping out around the school. So somebody will need help asking out their boyfriend to prom, or saving the mascot costume from the rival school. There is one that kind of stands out like a sore thumb, where a female teacher is kidnapped for no apparent reason. That's a bit ominous. but there is a nice twist to it where Miles is attempting to conduct a phone interview for college while in stealth. That mission aside, these BV missions and the Peter side missions, which I'll talk about in a minute, really make me want a Miles Morales-like spin-off that's solely centered on a younger Peter Parker or Miles Morales in high school. But since Miles is graduating high school, we'll probably never get that, and that's most likely why there's so much teenage Peter in this game. The Blaze side quests for Peter were initially very fucking boring until the game reintroduced Yuri Watanabe as Wraith. Her return was so well done. I missed her character so much. There's this nice tug and pull between the relationship, with this almost platonic will they won't they be friends again. The twist in the knife that the leader of the Flame is Cletus fucking Cassidy was insane. Maybe it's because I was playing it late at night, but it didn't really register in my brain that Cletus could be adapted at all. For some reason, he just wasn't on my radar. It does suck that Insomniac's way of ending side missions is for just random cliffhangers, so you have to wait until the next game. Cletus just gets the symbiote, drops the C name, and gets on a helicopter, never to be seen again. Whether or not he'll be adapted in DLC, again, I'll make a separate video on it. We're already clocking in at almost a fucking hour here. Outside of Cletus and Yuri, the missions themselves aren't that fun or memorable. The inclusion of those two in the story kinda saves these missions from being a hard skip for me. The museum side quest for Miles is also getting a lot of flack. Gee, I wonder why. I also like this one. I appreciate how it's rooted in an evident love for Harlem's musicians, but the story does make no sense. The guy who was going to financially support the museum did all that as a ruse so he can hire thugs to steal the instruments, since his grandfather was the producer for most of these black musicians. Much like Miles' standalone game, it's got an underlying message about the all too common creative theft and commodification of work done by black artists, but it kind of fell a bit short for me. Alright, I won't make you wait any longer. Let's talk about Howard. Howard's death was something I didn't think would affect me at all, but him just asking you to find a new place for the birds, swinging around the city as Seabird by the Alicia Brothers plays in the background, it sets this whimsical and melancholic tone that sounds like you're on an afternoon drive, only for Howard to die as you're on the phone with him. It's fucking depressing. It recontextualizes all our experiences saving those damn pigeons in the first game, and makes it really feel like we lost someone close to our main character. This, like the MJ missions, is the upside of long-term storytelling that's willing to stick to its guns, regardless of audience backlash. It's a beautifully well done send-off for the character who's been a constant in these games, as well as a side activity that most people didn't like. But it's still capped off in a way that feels earned. The mission where you play as Hailey as you fix all this destroyed art around the city was one of the best in the game, surprisingly enough. Since she's deaf, the game tries to emulate that by using audio and haptic feedback. I personally had a lot of issues with these sort of slower paced missions in the first game, but Insomniac somehow made it work this time. It's not too long, it's not a drawn out stealth mission, and I liked watching how Hailey helped this artist eventually find support. It's just a really cute mission. My personal favorite side mission in the entire game is Photo Help. It plays almost like a one-off comic. It's a mission where Spider-Man gives advice to an aspiring photographer who wants to be just like Peter Parker. So you end up playing a flashback where Peter is on his way to sell Jonah his first photo, and as they're on the phone, Jonah begins to give Peter some solid life advice. I always appreciate the more human aspect of that character coming through in very small ways. It's a very cute scene to see this high-pitched Peter Parker try to be confident and yell, only to quickly apologize. It's a great mission with some pretty decent advice from Peter to the photographer that you have to do things your own way and not let anyone tell you no. It's a beautiful little microcosm of what a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man can be, and reminds me of some of my personal favorite issues about Spider-Man, just being a cool dude. Rooftop fireworks, really unremarkable. It's about these two guys trying to tribute their deceased brother by setting off fireworks, which is illegal in New York. One of them gets hurt and tells Spider-Man where these illegal fireworks are being sold. You stop the thugs, only for the fireworks to create this gigantic explosion that both of the brothers saw, allowing them to kind of get their wish to commemorate their brother. That's really it. It's half-baked and overshadowed by almost every other Apper quest in the game. It's kind of a shame. Monster in Queens is where you help a lonely blind woman try to find a monster that's been destroying her backyard, only to find out that it's a stray hunter bot who was shot at by its owner. Genki reprograms it to be a dog, and Peter regifts it to the woman since she can't afford a guard dog. It's sweet, it's short, not very fun to play, but it's nice that it establishes how much Peter still cares for his community. Mysterio was okay. The first mission you play during the main story is the rhythm game, which is not like any of the other challenges, so I don't know why they did it that way. The rest of the side quests are these same combat challenges that we've seen from Taskmaster and Screwball. The only difference is that Mysterio will actively interfere with you by throwing cars or trains at you, and I do like that it adds something to shake things up. The entire premise is that Quentin Beck is good now and wants to have a 5D experience or some shit, but people end up getting trapped in these machines, forcing Miles to free them. Not really sure why this is a Miles-specific mission chain, but once you complete the challenges, it's revealed that Mysterio's assistants have kidnapped Quentin and were the ones trapping people all along to frame him. Kinda obvious looking back, that's not really what I care about. The best thing about this side quest is the final mission where you play a boss fight with Mysterio. It is everything I have wanted from a modern Mysterio fight and more. If you're a big fan of his inclusion in the 2004 game and have wanted something more like it, or if you're like me, like the idea of the funhouse more than its actual execution, then this is going to be a fun mission for you. I kinda wish Mysterio was just played straight and we got to see more of him being evil, but I appreciate what they try to do with this character and tying him into the theme of getting a second chance. Whew, okay, you get the fucking point now. The side missions are really fucking good. I've talked about everything. Can we be done now? The soundtrack is really amazing. It's so good. My personal favorite track is the open world theme when you're playing as Symbiote Peter. It's so dramatic and I adore it. There's been a lot of flack given to John Paisano's soundtrack where it's too superhero-y, but I think that that's the point. It's almost like the soundtrack that plays in comic book creators' heads as they make the actual books, and I love it for that. Okay. Now we're done. Spider-Man 2 is a big fucking deal and it knows it. It slaps its big fat cock on the table like it owns the fucking place. Okay, so I'm no longer allowed to write at 4 a.m. I have reviewed a good amount of Spider-Man stuff, mainly games, and I've played and replayed many more. And I can safely say that Spider-Man 2 overall is the best in the franchise, at least in terms of a complete package. Of course, there are specific things and mechanics I like more in past games, but on average, this is one of the best superhero games I've ever played. It's definitively my game of the year. I get that I've said that a lot, and that's because it's been an already overloaded year of heavy hitters. Its story was able to tie different aspects of the character together while also making some choices I was surprised by, and even left me clamoring for more. Its web swinging is the definitive best of the best, and its representation of New York feels like it can't be surpassed. It's not perfect. Obviously, some of the side missions are lacking. The cinematic walking missions might be a major turnoff to most people. The enemies lack variety, and it's definitely the buggiest out of the 3 Insomniac titles, which is more frustrating since it's $70. I had this issue with Jedi Survivor, Gotham Knights, as well as any other buggy $70 game, and I will not stop complaining about this until it's no longer a fucking issue. To be fair, my game never crashed, and most of these bugs aren't major, and many have been patched out already. But this is the first time I've ever played an Insomniac Spider-Man game and came across full-on glitches that genuinely bothered my experience. There's no reason that a game for $60, but especially $70, should release with these many notable bugs. I understand that the bigger a game gets, the harder it is to contain or catch some of these, but it's still disappointing nonetheless. Whether or not some bugs, the cinematic missions, or the omission of a new game plus at launch makes this a hard sell is dependent on where you stand on the $70 price point, or if you even have a PS5 currently. However, whenever you do get a console, or when it does get ported to PC in 2025 or some shit, I think that Spider-Man 2 is a must-buy for whatever platform it's on. Maybe my opinion will cool down and I'll eventually think, I don't know, Spider-Man Battle for New York is the real best Spider-Man game? But for now, this is almost every single thought I've ever had in my fucking brain about Spider-Man 2. Don't forget to share this video on the TikTok shop.
Spider-Man! What's cracking, baby? Woo! Hey! Where you going, Spider-Man? Woo-hoo! Ha! You're getting the girl. Saving the day. Yeah! Go, Spider-Man!
If you're into computer stuff, go to the one place that has it all, like Spider-Man the computer game. And now, get